health doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in our communities. And so therefore we are very interested in how we can fit and work with our communities.
And general principles of healthcare reform and good healthcare is, you've heard it before, you're being cared by the right person in the right place at the right time. And often we're not doing that. And hospital in the home and in its various guises is one option for healthcare systems. Not the only one, but an important one, and perhaps underutilised.
And particularly to support the patient to be able to manage their own health as much as possible and to live as a normal and healthier life as possible. Technology has a key piece, designing how we do set up systems, how we educate health professionals and others, how we do have the best frameworks and the best funding models that encourage those systems to come together around the patient or around the individual.
The model that has proven to be successful in practice is if there's a component of comprehensive care that would otherwise need care in hospital but can be done at home with adequate support, then by all means do it. The other group who get the rough end of this to some extent, general practitioners, and unless they're built into the home caring team, by that I mean properly informed, properly resourced, properly supported, then we're corroding their professional satisfaction, among other things.
So the challenge for general practice for these patients is to have an involvement with that, perhaps not to be the people executing the delivery of the hospital and home services, but as Stephen said too, to be involved, not isolated, not sidelined. And that's because, at least among other things, GPs can contribute a lot of knowledge about the individual patients and the background health conditions that they've had that's led to their episode of being unwell at the time. So the challenge for general practice for these patients is to have an involvement with that, perhaps not to be the people executing the delivery of the hospital and home services, but as Stephen said too, to be involved, not isolated, not sidelined. And that's because, at least among other things, GPs can contribute a lot of knowledge about the individual patients and the background health conditions that they've had that's led to their episode of being unwell at the time.
Who owns the patient? Your question, Norman, who owns the patient in this? That's surely a patient decision, and it's a decision that can be undertaken in consultation with a GP who knows them well enough to assess the risks, to engage in that risk stratification that we've seen as a problem in terms of making hospital in the home work.
In actual fact, what we need is for the GP to play a key role in case coordination, but do it with patients' choices and patient involvement, because if we empower the patients to take a more active role in what they're doing, then you'll do what I want. I don't want to end up in hospital.
Does that treating team want to give up governance to, say, an ambulatory care unit who then liaises with GPs to look after the patient? Or, are the patient, do the GPs themselves want to take on that burden of, managing these types of patients? In my area health service, that's probably one of the biggest things, is that engagement between the hospital and the GPs. There are a lot of GPs that, are a little bit standoffish about taking on these types of patients.
We've got to be careful we don't shift the responsibility for care entirely onto the family, who already carry a heavy weight of all this. All the care is provided by the relatives and friends. Don't worry about hospital in the home. Care in the home is done by those people.
And the carer burden one, interestingly, the literature so far suggests there's not an increase. So I think we really do need to look at that, because in work I've done for Carers Australia, it sort of suggests that perhaps that there may be an increase in carer burden. But the jury's probably out on the carer. People are using catheters and inserting devices into their bodies and having to manage pumps, and there's a lot of pharmaceuticals, and so you have to assess, whether the patient is going to be able to handle all of that, particularly if they're older and maybe have, mild cognitive impairment. Maybe they don't have a living spouse anymore or somebody to care for them at home. there are all those issues that Mary raised about the domestic setting, whether they've got people to look after the home. So there's the choice of patient which needs to be carefully considered.
A lot of healthcare costs are borne by the community. That's actually not by the community, by carers, by people living in the household. Australia has one of the highest rates of out-of-pocket costs for healthcare in the world. Now, the risk, of course, with hospital in the home of transferring care more into the home is that it's actually the people at the low end of that income distribution who bear the worst. So you might see an overall benefit, but you might actually be further disadvantaging the most disadvantaged.
Do they have the ability to, have that cognitive ability to be able to manage looking after that device themselves, like that catheter? If they can't, does the carer themselves have the ability to do it?
Cost? 25k a year each. Cost in hospital? 50k. Stands to reason under those circumstances from every point of view that this is a good way to go.
And in 5 of those 6 cases, the admissions hospital patients were actually more expensive, and the savings by just changing the setting were about 22% on average across the 6 conditions. But there was one, which was COPD, the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which actually cost more, slightly more, in the home environment to provide.
Patient preference is really important. I don't think you can expect anybody to do a therapy well at home if they weren't wanting to go there. We know physicians have a huge influence on whether people choose to go home or not, but at the end of the day, patient preference, I think, is going to indicate success or not.
You've got to be very empathetic, I think, to the needs of the person and their family and carers.
In terms of incentives, yes, there's a need for education and facilitation of the translation and change of setting. And that includes a lot of information. It includes reducing the other barriers, which are training of the individual. There is a lot of paraphernalia that goes in having to manage your care at home.
When you look at across the different local health districts, there is a disparity, for example, with the knowledge and the ability of the clinical work that different, for example, community nurses can do. For example, there are some local health districts where there is quite an increased scope of practice where community nurses are managing patients within their home, they're managing drains, they're managing dialysis, they're doing all sorts of things that would normally be done in an acute hospital. But then you may go to other local health districts whereby the scope of practice is quite minimal, which then puts more burden on ambulatory care units because patients then have to present to those clinics to have those procedures done.
We're doing really well by international standards, so New Zealand's doing better, which is typical, but generally we're doing really well.
Can't play cricket.
There are a couple of countries that really, for example, Mexico only offers peritoneal dialysis pretty much, so by default they're doing really well. But generally, as far as the westernised world we're doing well. So 40% of patients in New South Wales are doing their dialysis at home. Managing dialysis at home is a 20-hour-a-week job. It's quite technical. 60% of carers, at least we believe, get involved with supporting treatment and are not really eligible for any benefits for doing that.
Everybody's got some great ideas, lots of things are being tried, but how we draw that together to say, well, what are the answers, what are the most effective ways to do this? I think coming back to our university setting and the translational health focus, I'd like to put that out to the university, that I think is a really important area in which we would all be looking to learn from.